It's the Y'all Show, talk with a Southern accent with John Rawl. And here on this show, we don't always go to California to bring on guests about the Southeast, but this guy has had such a variety of music that he's been a part of, bluegrass, rock, country. When he's able to, when the coronavirus isn't going on, he's still making great music. Chris Hillman, who was a founding member of the Byrds, is on with us right now on the Y'all Show. And, of course, you might remember him in the 1980s as a member of the Desert Rose Band. And we're going to bring him on to talk about his incredible career and the new book that he has just penned. Chris, welcome into the Y'all Show.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me on today.
And I think I'm right, based on my research. You have done a lot of music, but this is your first book.
Yeah, that is my first book.
I don't know what took you so long.
That's right. Well, I spent about 7 years on the darn thing, and finally was a big fat manuscript sitting on the shelf, and I said to my wife, maybe we should find an agent and see if anybody's interested in this thing, and otherwise I'll just give it to the kids to read, to the grandkids, and lo and behold, we meet Scott Bomar from BMG, and he says, can I read some of it? And I send him some chapters, and the next day he calls me and says, let's talk. He wanted to publish it, which was great, and he said, we don't need a co-writer. I said, that's even better. So off we went. Then I rewrote the whole thing and shortened it a bit and this and that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I was talking to Mark Volman yesterday. He was a member of the Turtles, primary member, and Mark, of course, was teaching at Vanderbilt for a while, I think. And what was I talking about? Just that growing up in that particular time period and all that. So,
well, Time Between is the book, and it is really a time between, through, above, beyond, and more, because Chris Hillman really represents American music in the post-World War II era. You grew up in the 50s and 60s, and you were right there at the forefront. In fact, I don't have the quote in front of me. Tom Petty in the Ford had an incredible quote calling you really the father of country rock music. How about that?
That was pretty nice of him, old Tom. He was a wonderful man.
Good Florida boy there, which is one of the reasons we're talking today. You have never, to my knowledge, and I didn't read about it in the book, never lived in the South. You've been here a lot, but you've never lived here. But gosh, you would never know it based on your music and your just great history.
I never did have the opportunity. Not that it didn't cross my mind through the years. I certainly love. There's lots of parts down south, southeast I just love. But no, I never got a chance to live down there. But yeah, musically, well, you got to remember, John, that most of the people that most of the country music in California came out with the folks that moved during the Dust Bowl and the Depression. Of course, we're talking about Merle Haggard, and Buck Owens, especially. Gosh darn it, Rose Maddox, the Maddox brothers came out. All these families came out in the early 30s and brought their music with them. That's why there's such a vibrant country music scene, really originating in Bakersfield, but was all over the lower southern part of the state. We had so much country music, and a lot of TV shows that I watched, which I wrote about in the book. And my gosh, getting to work in a band with Vern Gosdin and his brother Rex and Don Parmalee and the Golden State Boys, that was they taught me everything. So I didn't know, not only did I learn more about bluegrass, I learned about the culture through them because they had grown up in Alabama and Kentucky.
Yeah.
So I learned all about the culture, how they thought, how they ate, whatever. It was great. That was an ultimate education for me.
Talking with Chris Hillman here on the Y'all Show. Again, an incredible career. And he just dropped the Voice's name here on the show, Vern Gosdin. And you worked with Vern and his brother Rex in California as they had moved out there. And yeah, and there's just so many people that Chris Hillman, your hands have touched or you've been around going back to the 1950s as music came into your life. In fact, it was a native Arkansan who was your school janitor that really helped you start playing a lot.
He was the best. Bill Smith was my first mentor, John. And Bill was the head custodian. He played in a band on the weekends. Eventually he decided he wanted to be a steel player. He learned how to play steel, but man, he was just terrific. He was there for me, and he'd have me over every Saturday. And it was so funny. I was thinking, told a lot of people, I said, boy, in this environment, you wouldn't go to the teacher's house or the school custodian's house, you know, the way things are in this world today. But Bill took me under his wing, and he taught me all about music. I remember seeing at his house one of Buck Owens' very first Capitol releases, and it was Above and Beyond. I believe it was a cover of a drawing of Buck Owens sitting down on a hillside, and I remember Bill says, "This guy's going to be a huge star," and I kept listening to Buck right through my bluegrass days. In fact, one of the guys in the Golden State Boys, I think Don Parmley, says, "You don't need to listen to that. Just listen to bluegrass." I said, "Well, Buck's pretty close to it all, you know." So anyway,
you as a teen, you did start kind of learning and playing bluegrass. That's after you were there, as we have a picture courtesy of your website of you on a horse. I guess the next John Wayne there in Southern California. How did you even get exposed to bluegrass music?
Oh man, well, you know, I my age, of course, I was right there in 1955 when rock and roll just blossomed, and I loved it. I mean, of course, and Elvis and Fats Domino and everybody, Little Richard, and started buying the records. I didn't want to learn the guitar then. I don't know why, what that was about, but it wasn't until 1959, and then I write about it in a book where my older sister comes back from University of Colorado, and she has all these folk albums. Now, I had listened to the Kingston Trio. They had a hit with Tom Dooley, big hit on the radio. So as rock and roll started just to die down, and we got more Fabian and Frankie Avalon and Paul Anka stuff, like, which is okay, but it got a little quiet, and then folk music started coming along off the college campuses. And my sister brought home some great records of the Pete Seeger and the Weavers and the Woody Guthrie. So I went to that, and then I heard the New Lost City Ramblers. Okay, string music, old-time string music, and that's where I saw Mike Seeger playing the mandolin. I went, And then I heard Flat and Scruggs, and buddy, that was it. That just set a nerve off in me, and I had to hear it. I had to learn to play it. I loved it, and there was maybe two other guys in my high school, of all of 700 people in my high school, that liked bluegrass. So here we are in the middle of San Diego County, not necessarily a hotbed of country music. However, in my book, as you might have saw, I read, I did play, when I was 18, I was in the Scottsville Squirrel Barkers, one of my favorite bluegrass bands ever to be in, and we played for Smokey Rogers, who was a big country star down in San Diego. So that's where I had Tex Ritter.
Yeah.
Tex Ritter put his hand on my shoulder. That was like the sign of approval, man. I watched his movies when I was a little guy growing up, and he was such a nice man, you know. And I remember telling his wife after he had passed what he did. She said, "Oh, Tex always wanted to encourage young musicians." I said, "Well, he sure was nice to me."
And with the Squirrel Barkers, you had a television appearance there, and a young Regis Philbin had you on his show.
Yeah. Regis Philbin started out in San Diego, and remember I wrote about, was it Frankie Avalon? He was watching us rehearse before they filmed the show, and he was fascinated, because he's a kid from Philadelphia. I didn't hear a lot of bluegrass there, so it was all fun, John. I had a great time.
Well, again, Chris Hillman, somehow or another, has just about been involved, I'm going to say it, you don't have to say it, with just about every big music deal going on in the last 60, 70 years. And in the 60s, you went from bluegrass to being a founding member of the Byrds, one of the most, I guess, famous bands of the mid-1960s in music. And I always thought, when I saw your artwork and more, in fact, I'll show a cover of one of your 1960s albums, Never Before, I thought these guys are trying to be the Beatles. And after reading your book, I think that's exactly what you were trying to do, and you don't hide it in your book.
No, initially we emulated the Beatles, loved them. We must have seen the Hard Day's Night 20 times at the theater. And but then we got, we developed our own sound, I mean, we weren't, the thing about the Byrds that was unique is we weren't rock and roll guys. Everybody came out of folk music. Roger McGuinn, David Crosby, all of them, everybody was played folk music. Me, bluegrass, of course, but we did develop a sound. We did initially listen and love the Beatles, and they were very kind to us when we went to London in 1965. English tour of the summer of '65, and we met the Beatles. They were very, very kind. And in fact, George Harrison did "If I Needed Someone" as a tribute to the Byrds. It's a song he wrote and sang that sounds a bit like the Byrds, and he did that he said this is a tribute to the Byrds, and they loved us for about a year. They were their favorite band. Anyway,
if you could pick one of the Beatles to kind of play your role, who is the Beatle that is most like Chris Hillman?
Well, sarcastically, in my younger days, it would have been John Lennon, because I mean he was something. He was as we would term, a wise guy. A diplomatic term, a wise guy. But I don't know, gosh, I mean, McCartney was my bass idol. I listened to him. That's how I learned how to play the bass. I listened to Paul McCartney as he played with a pick, and he played counter melody to what was going on. I thought that was pretty good. Listened to him a lot. But I don't know if I could ever have been one of the Beatles.
And one of your members there, among many, David Crosby, and you had Roger McGuinn and others, part of the Byrds. But just like most bands, ultimately things happen. People go their separate ways. And here you are as the 60s are raging, and you find yourself in another iconic 60s band, the Flying Burrito Brothers. Tell me about that time of the 60s as a part of that band.
Well, I tell you, John, I always thought the 60s were really great, and it started out very idealistic, of course, and let's all get along, and da-da-da-da-da. About 1968, 69, that sort of went away. That dream just sort of evaporated. We had the Charles Manson murders in 1969. We had Altamont, which I played, the Rolling Stones free concert where the guy gets murdered. I said, the 60s are over. I actually said it back then. This is the day the 60s died, was that Altamont concert. And then it got to where Roger McGuinn and I were the last guys in the Byrds. Everybody had sort of left, and we finished this album, the notorious Byrd Brothers. Turned out to be a good record. And then I went off with Graham Parsons and started the Flying Burrito Brothers, So Graham had a good feel for country music. He loved it. I had a compadre, a guy that understood the music, and off we went to do the Burritos, which really was a country band. It was, we did some really great songs, I think.
Yes.
Together in that first album, and I know because a lot of people covered our songs. Emmy Lou did a lot of our songs. Emmy Lou Harris, Dwight Yoakam, and Katie Lang, and Beck, and all these different people cut our early Burrito Brothers stuff, which is the ultimate compliment if you're a songwriter, if someone covers your songs.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you write in your book, you had these great bands of the 60s, and then the 70s came, and it wasn't quite so hit-making for you. Early 80s come, and it wasn't until you remember the Desert Rose Band, I don't think until you had your very first number one.
That's correct. And I didn't even want to start another band. I mean, in the early 80s, after Roger McGuinn and I had quit working together again, Roger and Gene Clark and I played a solo, and I played acoustically as a duet with Al Perkins, who had worked with me in the Burritos and Manassas. But John Jorgensen, who's a fantastic musician, as we all know, really was pushing to do a band. And I said, I don't know if I want to do this, and da-da-da-da-da. But he was pretty insistent, and we put this band together. And I wasn't looking for a record deal, John, and along comes a record deal. So it's like when you're least looking for something, it sort of pops up in your life. And when you're looking for something, sometimes it's not there. But anyway, the Desert Rose Band, after all those groups, was the ultimate. It was where I had gone through as sort of an apprentice band member or second lieutenant or whatever way you want to call it. And then Desert Rose Band, I called the shots, ran the band, wrote the songs and all that, all the above. And it was a good group.
It was. Let me tell you, as a guy growing up in the 80s listening to country music radio, I want to thank you for the soundtrack of my youth, because She Don't Love Nobody, if you don't hear that song and get in a upbeat mode, then I don't know what's wrong with you. And, of course, you shared one of the songs, Hello Trouble. Your buddy Herb Peterson took the lead on that one.
Brad Paisley said to me, or John, he said, the Desert Rose Band changed my life in high school. He said, I heard the Desert Rose Band, it completely changed my life, and he was a huge fan of John's guitar playing. So we had a fan with Brad from the early days on, and he was always very complimentary about the Desert Rose Band. But as far as our live performances, man, it was up there, the 90th percentile as far as we was such a professional player,
Yeah.
I didn't have anything to worry about. The other bands, somebody would always be a little having difficulties with this or that, but Desert Rose was good singing, good playing, and everybody cared. Everybody cared enough to do a great show for people. If there were 20 people out there, if there were 20,000, we did the same show.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. So that was the longest band I was in. I was in that band 8 years.
Yeah, and that was, again, a country music act of the late 80s, early 90s on Curb, MCA Curb, and had so many good songs, and just a pleasure. Thank you again. I'm John Rawl. This is the Y'all Show. We're talking with Chris Hillman, a founding member of the Byrds, also the Flying Burrito Brothers, a member of the Desert Rose Band, the general of the Desert Rose Band, as he's just told us here on the Y'all Show, and he's just been involved with making great music for a long time. We don't want to age him, but to your credit, Chris, and your new book, Time Between, you put it right there for everybody to read. Your birth date, born in December of 1944.
Yeah. 37 and a half years old. Happy at my age, I really am. I don't know. In these days, John, I don't know if I'd want to be a young 24-year-old guy in this particular environment, climate now. But hey, I always looked at it. I was very blessed. God blessed me, and all the groups I was in, I survived a lot of it all, and I lost some good friends. A lot of people that just got swept into these dark areas, and there's nothing I could really do. I couldn't, I tried to help Graham, as did Emmy Linwood. We both did, but poor guy, he was a talented man, but he just had some demons he had to deal with. So.
Yeah, again, drugs were, no matter where you were in the 60s, it was a big part of the scene, and you survived that, and you've had a pretty good co-captain for over 40 years. To help you through children, and I think you've got a couple of grandchildren there in California.
Yes, I do. I love them dearly.
And what do they call you? What is your nickname?
Papa.
Papa?
Papa.
I should have known that.
Little guy, little grandson's too. Papa. And he wants to do Legos. We sit and we build some cars together. I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
It's sweet as can be.
Well, that's awesome there. Papa Hillman here on today's Y'all Show. We're wrapping up our conversation. And so we've been talking about Chris Hillman, the musician, the songwriter, and more. And now he can add, if he didn't have enough accolades and enough guitars there in the background, he can add author, as he has penned Time Between. You said this is something you've been debating a long time. What was the discipline like to write a book compared to writing music?
It's completely different. I think it's easier to sit down and write a book. Now, mind you, you're sitting there writing, and you'll write some silly things, of course, and you have to go through it and sort of edit it. And then my daughter is an English lit teacher, and she was the first one to edit the manuscript, and she was merciless, John. She said, "Dad, another cliche. What did you write? It feels like heaven on earth." She said, She took a red pencil. She had a hard copy. She goes, "Nope." And she's writing stuff in my manuscript. I said, "Honey," she said, "Dad, let's not put all those cliches in there. You've got 200 exclamation points." So she was so funny. She was a stickler on grammar. And then as I got my publishing deal and I rewrote the book, of course, I had some great help from my wife, editing ideas. Scott Bomar, the head of the BMG Publishing, his idea to open the book with our house fire, I thought was brilliant. Where we open with fire and then we backtrack it to things,
Yeah. Well, it's not a light read. If you've just got an hour to read a book, this is not the one, because you put a lot in there. and that's good.
A lot more too, but we got her trimmed down a bit. I'd love to try something else down the road, John. I'm not sure what. I know there's probably a great story about old John Robertson. I already wrote a song about him, but he had an amazing life as an actor and a director and a screenwriter in the 20s, you know, and that would be an interesting thing to research and look at, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, again, Chris Hillman, although a native Californian, he does have Southern roots. His mother's side of the family from East Texas, I think. And so that's part of the Southern way of life is storytelling and more. And so you've been doing it through the music, and now you got books to add to your credit.
Like I said, John, God has blessed me. And I always saw these wonderful doors open for me. And I also had some wonderful people that I referred to, my mentors, my catalyst. Mentor's a better word. That would, like Bill Smith, the janitor, he was dying of Parkinson's, about 4 years ago, and I went and saw him, and I sang to him, and I said, you know, Bill, if it hadn't been for you, I would have probably ended up either, maybe not alive. I might have had to gone to Vietnam or something. And he said, all I did, Chris, he said, I just pointed the way for you. He said, I knew you had the goods. That was the nicest thing. He said, I knew you had the goods. I just said, do this.
Well, Vietnam did get in the way of one of your early bands. How did you get out of going to Vietnam? Because you were the perfect age.
Oh, buddy, I got drafted twice.
Did you?
In '65, they were taking anybody. If you had a semblance of health, they'd make you a clerk or something, a typist. I got drafted in 1964, but I was supporting my mother.
Oh.
My brother was an Air Force officer. My older sister was already out of the house, so my little sister and I and my mother and I was helping support her after my dad died. And then I got drafted again right when the Byrds started to take off, and I somehow got out of it on the same premise of supporting my mom, and that we already had one of the family members in the service, my brother. So
I see.
You know, I mean, yeah, they were taking everybody seriously. It was no. I mean, it's a terrible, stupid thing to say. War is stupid, but that war, my gosh, these poor guys, I feel bad. So anyway,
it was, and I've talked to plenty of veterans who said if you didn't have to serve, more power to you. That's perfectly understandable. Chris Hillman, you survived the '60s, and you've been here all these years, and now we can add author to your repertoire. Thank you so much for coming on again of the Byrds and on the Flying Burrito Brothers as well as the Desert Rose Band. ChrisHillman.com is the website, and if you go there, you have an option to know about Chris Hillman's tour dates. I don't see anything there now, but stay tuned, right?
They'll be there, John. I hope to God we get out there in September and finish up these shows that we had booked. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to seeing Chris Hillman in concert and reading his book. Thank you again for coming on The Y'all Show, Chris Hillman.
Thank you, John, for having me.
All right. And we'll have more of The Y'all Show coming up after this. Stay tuned. It's The Y'all Show Talk with a Southern accent.